Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
podcast for parents and families everywhere.
Whether you have kids that plan to attend college or you have current college students, you want them in and you want them to graduate.
You want a quality education that will give you a skill set that will make you marketable for the jobs of today and the jobs of tomorrow. I am Mark Stucker, and I'm a college coach from Metro Atlanta.
And I am Anika Madden, and I am a parent also from Atlanta, currently in North Carolina.
And I'm David Williams, and I'm a dad from Chicago, Illinois.
This week in the news, the mess that is college admissions, a continuation of our great discussion of an article by Jason England of Vox. This week is also bonus content week, where Mark is going to discuss a topic he doesn't think has been emphasized enough in the last 159 episodes, something that admission officers are really interested in looking for in an application. Our interview is part 1 of 6 with Julia Esquivel, a former admissions officer and a current college counselor at Milton Academy in Massachusetts, on how to work more effectively with your school counselor. And our college spotlight comes to you by Lisa Rouff, who is going to talk to us about her alma mater, the University of Chicago.
Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. To all of our listeners, we are full of hearts and love for you.
That's right, man.
We're recording this on the February 14th, the big Valentine's Day. So feeling very sentimental to all of you. We love you guys. We appreciate you. And you really are our listening family. And every week, a highlight of our week is coming here and sharing with you all. So I just had to give a big shout out. Happy Valentine's Day.
And I want to say that Chicago has the distinction of having, I think, the coldest recorded Valentine's Day in history. So I sure hope you have someone to cuddle up to, or else you better get some batteries for your electric socks, because it's cold out there.
Well, I think that Frida's just making up for all that time in the Virgin Islands and making you run around, man.
Oh, yeah. I'm retiling her bathroom.
And we won't be seeing Dave in the Virgin Islands too much anymore. I think Frida's like, stay here in Chicago. He'll be toughing it out in Chicago for the next little while.
That's right. I'm going to have to put that on hold and do a little work here for a while.
Well, listen, I'm diving right in today because we have so much to cover. It's a power-packed episode. And our tip today comes in from one of our listeners who actually sent this in. And I thought, why have I not been telling everybody this? So this is the shout out to Kelly from Pennsylvania. And she said, one of the best things I did with my child was, instead of having them take the SAT or the ACT right around the corner where they'd be with all of their classmates and it can add an element of stress, we drove a couple hours away where she didn't know anybody. And it took a lot of the stress away. And I thought, that's a great tip. That's a great tip. If you feel it's going to add some stress to taking the test with all your peers, then go to a location where you probably won't know anybody and it can relieve some of the stress. So that's our admissions tip of the week. You ready, Dave? I'm going to try to give you one I think you might be able to get, man. I'm feeling sorry for you over there.
Oh, man, I'm an Ethiopian child here. I'm just, I haven't had a good meal in months.
All right, here we go, man. The term is differently abled. Differently abled. What does that mean?
Differently abled means that someone has a special skill set. It's almost close to like disabled. I don't know.
I'm going to give you some credit for that. So The term disabled is sort of seen pejoratively, like you're a leper or something. You know? What's wrong with you? And so the new term you're hearing used much more frequently these days is differently abled, just to take away a little bit of the stigma to putting somebody down that can be implied to who wants to be disabled. So, some people say, oh, come on, that's PC, run amok. But the other side of it is language is extremely important, and what you label people can really impact how they see themselves from a self-image standpoint. So differently abled Disabled, the same thing. I'm going to give you points for that one. You got it at the last second. You're just up against the buzzer.
Thank you, my BIPOC friend.
Hey, BIPOC.
Hey, BIPOC. All right.
Let's turn to college hot topics in the news. All right, let's dive right in. As we said last week, we're doing a 4-parter here, Dave. You want to give a bit of an overview?
This is a great article by Jason England, The Mess That Is College Admissions. He is a former admissions officer, and he talks about the 8 things that he wished people knew about the college admissions process. Last week, we covered 2 huge things, early decisions and how early decisions really favors the wealthy. And also it covered private schools. And he basically made the point that when you look at the resources that private schools can give to their students and the way that they are tuned into the college admissions process on levels that the public schools can't even imagine, those things really differentially impact the wealthy over the poor. We are going to get to points 3 and 4 today. Mark, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Here's a biggie, a huge one. And that is number 3, standardized testing, in which he states standardized testing is just as problematic as the vague concept of preparedness and is as contingent on wealth. And he makes a very provocative statement. He says, we think admissions values ideals, self-motivation, independent thinking, creativity, and service to the community. But in reality, test scores, ranking, and private schools reign supreme. And he goes further and says because SAT scores have become a de facto prime criteria for ranking different universities, they have achieved a preeminence never before imaginable. And unfortunately, these SAT scores are directly correlated with family wealth. So, Mark, let me stop there and throw that open to you.
Yeah, this is deep. So, I really think the public doesn't realize that if you took every zip code, not just zip code, let's just say you hone down to more granular level than zip code, census tract or whatever. And if you had a big map of your whole state and instead of it saying, 30210, whatever the zip code is, it just had the average SAT score. And then you superimpose that on another map that was based on the wealth of each area, they would virtually be the same.
Yep.
The correlation between parent education and family wealth and test scores is off the chain. And this is something that schools are aware of. Now, a lot's been doing more recently with landscape. We've talked about that before to try to address it. Some schools have adopted that. But that's one of the problems, he says, with admission, because what he says is, I'm going to quote him here, elite universities, no matter how high-minded, have corporate souls and bottom lines. Despite being nonprofits, elite universities are competing businesses in an ever-evolving market. And more often than not, professed ideals will take a back seat to whatever drives the market. And then he says, if your competitor boosts an SAT median of a 1450 and 60% of their classes in the top 10, you need to at least match that. And so, he's driving home the point that as much as we'd love to emphasize other things, there are business constraints that force us to have to focus on certain things that we don't necessarily think are that important, but we have to do it. Now, one of the things that somebody taught me this a long time ago, and I love this, it's an axiom that I kind of learned to live by, and it says, what gets inspected gets expected.
Yep.
What gets inspected gets expected. And
or what gets measured is valued. Yes.
There is another one. Yes. Yeah. What gets measured gets valued. So, and I've said this before and I'll say it again. How do people determine what a good school is? Well, from my experience, there's 4 ways. Rankings, average test scores, acceptance rates, and when you throw a name out to the people, whoever they are, whoever you value, how do they react? You mention such and such school, they'd be like, ooh, really good school. Ooh, That's okay. Like those 4 things determine how people value a school. Colleges are very much aware of that. And they're aware, one of those 4 things I mentioned was test scores. And so this is the tricky part here, because colleges are businesses, but they're also nonprofits. And that throws people off. Like, well, wait a minute. I don't get that. So some people are like, well, you're business. You're no different than Wells Fargo. You know, I'm using Wells Fargo because a lot of you may remember that Wells Fargo had a huge scandal where people were opening up account in your name because they were getting commission. I mean, millions of accounts. So, you know, people think, well, you're business. You do anything. No, that's not true. Or they think, well, certainly if you're having a conversation with a financial aid officer, they're not trying to help you. They're just trying to squeeze more money out of you. No, that's not necessarily true. These are mission-driven organizations that try to exist to serve the mission. But here's the problem. If they feel like they will not be able to survive or thrive, then that's when aspects of the mission take a back seat to the practical realities of the world in which they live in. And here's an example I want to use. So my brother Norm lives in Colorado. Dave and I, Norm, we have our own little private group chat. We've been chatting a lot today before we get started today. We're always talking about politics.
That's right. Someone got acquitted, but he will not be named. Yeah. So that down yesterday. But my brother is, and people in Colorado will understand this. He knows a lot of the politicians in Colorado. I mean, he's plays golf with them. He's at their houses. He's just sort of some of the circles he works in. So people like, you know, Governor Hickenlooper, now Senator Hickenlooper, Jason Crow, Mike Kaufman, Cory Gardner. These are the politicians that my brother, you know, hobnobs with in his work. And so he's helped me try to understand politicians, because sometimes I'm like, what is wrong with these politicians? They seem like just put their finger up and they blow wherever the wind blows. And he sort of helped me understand. He said, you have to understand, the number one goal of a politician is to win elections. Their mindset is, if I can't win elections, then I can't do anything. You're like, where are you going with this? Well, that's kind of how schools sort of are. Like, yeah, they have a mission, and it's usually very noble. Very much some aspect of improving society in some way, make the world a better place, however they break that down. But they look at it like, well, if I can't continue to exist, or I can't exist with any type of strength, how could I carry out my mission? And so it forces them to have to pay attention to these metrics like test scores, because they know the public puts so much emphasis on them. I'll throw that out to you, Dave. Any more comments from you on this? Because there's a lot more I want to say, but I've been talking for a while. Well, I think two things about the SATs. Number one, ever since USU's War Report got on the scene 3-4 decades ago or whatever, you've seen schools game the system, Duke, New Chicago, Vanderbilt, where they want to almost like boast that they have the highest SAT scores, because they know that it can mean vaulting several rungs in the rankings. And that directly translates to student enrollment and donors and so forth. But more importantly, I really want to make the connection on how wealth is connected to SAT success. I'm going to just take one example. The kids at the top schools take the SATs multiple times. Sometimes they're involved in online summer courses that have them start taking the SATs as early as the 6th grade. And then when they fall a little bit short, they have access to the best prep programs that can easily boost another 30, 40, 50 points onto a child's score in the span of a couple months to get them into a certain range that public school kids couldn't even imagine. And I know because my daughter had all those benefits. She was part of a group of kids that did online education with Johns Hopkins and Northwestern and Duke from an early age. As part of getting into these courses, they require you to take SATs from as early as the 5th or 6th grade, and that determines what type of math courses you can get into. So by the time they're taking the SATs in the 11th grade, they've already had this test 3, 4, 5, 6 times. And then if they fall just a little bit short, there's tremendous pressure on their institution to go ahead and take it one last time, just so the institution can get you to maximize their score and they look the best. Mark, you remember that, Lauren ended up with a 1,500, I think, at 11th grade.
She was a little higher than that.
Great.
Oh, no, that was before she got some test prep. Yeah.
That's right. And
which I never recommended, by the way. But
you never recommended. But the school counselor basically was, no, we want take it one more time, because they wanted all their candidates to be scoring in the mid 1500s to get into those certain type of schools. Mark and I recognize now that the difference between 1500 and 1550 is insignificant. It is not a reflection of anything. It's just a reflection that a parent was able to plunk down a couple $1,000s on a test prep course to goose the extra 50 points. But the problem is, what about all those kids that don't have that extra $1,000? How about all those kids who are just trying to get food on their table and who are the parents just trying to make it work? And we're having direct comparisons. So I just bring that out to illustrate how unfair the SAT scores are for people who aren't in a certain socioeconomic bracket.
I want to add something to that. So everything you said is legit. No disgruntlement at all. But a lot of times when people talk about the class advantage of the SAT, they immediately focus on test prep. I would be the first to say that if there was no test prep at all, kids that come from educated families of means will do much better on that test. Yes. Because so many of those class advantages are not just centered around test prep. They're centered around other things. For example, just having an educated parent growing up leads to certain conversations that you have, certain experiences that you have, exposure to things, seeing people read books, travel, going to libraries, people who your parents are in their social network, so they're over and you're hearing these conversations. All these things have a significant impact on test scores. Plus, more educated and affluent parents live in neighborhoods where the schools are better. So this cumulative effect of better schools and middle-class role models and middle-class values over 12 plus years of schooling shows up on these standardized tests. And once again, nothing's wrong with that. If you've been privileged, God bless you, but just understand your differential advantage. And one of the things that he says in this article, and I love this statement, none of my personal or professional experience has legitimized the notion that an applicant with a 1440 is going to do any better in the classroom or more worthwhile as a citizen than an applicant with a 1250. And I make some statements on the SAT as it relates to affirmative action in my conversation with Anika, so I don't want to restate them because you'll hear them when you get to that portion. But I retract something that I said in the conversation earlier with Dave. I'll let you guys hear that when we get to the Anika portion. But there's another thing that I've learned, and I think it's so true when it comes to test scores, Dave. I can't remember who taught me this, but someone taught me this a long time ago. It says, people in power write the wealthy, basically. The wealthy write the rules in such a way as to declare themselves the winner. Yeah. Now, where am I going with this? If it was true that standardized test scores had an inverse relationship to family income and education, you would not see any SAT anywhere. In other words, the reason why some of these things become used is because it's a way to advantage the advantage. Now, that's kind of deep, but that's just something to think about. Hmm?
In Chicago here, despite this being a city that has 30% African Americans, one of the most segregated institutions has been the fire department. And one of the ways they keep it segregated is, in order to get in and to advance once you're in, they have a standardized test, knowing full well that most firemen of minority backgrounds will not do well on any type of standardized test because of the differences of the public school system. The point being is, why do you need a standardized test to be a fireman? Okay. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's an example of how you can write the rules in a way to declare certain people the winners.
That's absolutely correct. So, and the point that you're making here, basically, which I want to take away, and let's move on to the fourth one, is colleges internally don't necessarily feel like the test score is as significant as you think they think it is. It's just that there's kind of this ever keeping up with the Joneses. As long as the public, and it is the ranking guides, but it's not just the ranking guides, it is the population. I can't tell you, Dave, how many people have said to me, I look at average test scores as a proxy for how good the school is. Yep. And people do that apart from rankings. They'll look up the average test score and they'll say, oh, your average scores is this, your scores are this, you're the better school. And colleges are very much aware of that. As long as the public does that, whether it's the rankings or them just checking the stats, then it inevitably puts a survival type pressure on a school to have to account for that much more than they wish that they could. Which is, by the way, one of the reasons why colleges like test optional. Yeah. Because test optional allows them to actually pick students who they know can do well academically and add to their community, but now they're liberated from having to have their scores. You know, there's a term we used to use in admissions, and I used to use this term a lot in college counseling when I was doing it in boarding school. We called it protecting the profile. Colleges have to protect their profile, meaning if your average test score was a 1220, you know, on the SAT and a 25 on the ACT, you know next year's numbers better not be worse because people are watching that number like a hawk. So That's one reason why they like test optional, because it gives them the freedom sometimes to actually admit interesting kids, exciting kids that they know will add and make the school stronger, but they don't have to pay the heavy price of lowering their profile and then making themselves less competitive.
Well, I was going to ask you one follow-up question, Mark. Where do you see the future of the SAT, given the pandemic has forced or incentivized so many colleges to go test optional or even test blind? Do you think that its sway is going to weaken, or do you see it making a comeback in any way after the pandemic's over?
I see it weakening. I don't see it ever becoming obsolete. One thing that colleges love is getting lots of applications.
Right.
And not having test scores has proven to be an effective way to get more applications. The other thing is there were a lot of schools who were like, they were almost like people on crutches. They were dependent on the SAT. And now they've had that crutch removed and they realize I can walk without it.
That's right.
So schools are learning that, gee, I can actually make really good decisions without it. So I continue to see it being weakened, but I don't ever see it being obsolete. And so it's going to be somewhere in between. It'll always be there, but it will never have the impact or import ever again that it's had up into the class of 2019.
All right.
Let's move on, Dave.
Point number 4. Number 4. This is another very big one. And that is that men, especially white men, have an unfair admission advantage compared to women. The first point is that demographically, there is a significantly more number of successful women than men applying to college at this point in time. And secondly, because of athletics. And he makes the statement that Division III athletics have allowed regressive system of affirmative action for the demographic that needs it least, white men. What say you, Mark?
So, this is an important point. I'm glad he brings it up. And one of the things he says in the article is he's talking about affirmative action for males. He said that's a reality. But then he says, rarely do you hear people debate this form of affirmative action. And so I would say, why? And the reason why you rarely hear this is because you're attacking the power structure. And when you attack the power structure, there's massive blowback. And I'm going to do something that is questionable. I hope this works because this could be a whole in the news unto itself, Dave. But I'm going to read an article that when it came out, it was like a bomb that dropped. I remember it like it was yesterday. So Jennifer Britz used to be the admission director at Kenyon College. And she wrote an op-ed to the New York Times in March of 2006. That's 15 years ago, Dave. And I remember it like it was yesterday. And I'm going to read the whole thing to you because I think I can read it, even if it's a little lengthy. I think it'll be interesting. And the name of the article was called "To All the Girls I've Rejected." And so this is what it says. And this is, op-ed to the New York Times, former admission officer at Kenyon College, selective private school, Gambia, Ohio. So here's what it says. To all the girls I've rejected, March 23rd, 2006. I'm sure a lot of our listeners can relate to this. A few days ago, I watched my daughter, Madeline, open a thin envelope from one of the 5 colleges to which she had applied. Now, let me explain this. This is where when there's 15 years ago, there is a little bit of contextualization. So in the old days, you could tell right away if you were admitted by the size of the envelope. If it was thin, it was a denial, or maybe a wait list. And if it was thick, it was the packet of all the materials. Now, they're still true to some extent, but now people are usually finding out by either going into the portal and logging in or an email. So that's just for those of you who don't wonder what that's about. So anyway, I watched my daughter, Madeline, open a thin envelope from one of the 5 colleges to which she had applied. Why? Was what she was obviously asking herself as she handed me the letter saying she was waitlisted. Why? Indeed. She had taken the toughest courses in her high school and had done well. She had sat through several Saturday mornings taking the SATs and the like. She had participated in the requisite number of extracurricular activities. She had written a heartfelt and well-phrased essay and even taken the extra step of touring campus. She had not, however, been a National Merit finalist. She had not dug a well for a village in Africa. She had not climbed to the top of Mount Rainier. But she's smart. She's well-meaning. She's a hardworking teenage girl. But in the day and age of the swollen applicant pools that are decidedly female, that wasn't enough. The fat acceptance envelope is simply more elusive for today's accomplished young women.
Yep.
I know this all too well. At my own college these days, referring to Kenyon, where she's the mission director, we have 3 applicants for every 1 we can admit. Just 3 years ago, it was 2 to 1. Though Kenyon was a men's college until 1969, more than 55% of our applicants are female, a proportion that is increasing every year. This is 15 years ago in 2006. Yep. My staff and I carefully read these young women's essays about their passion for poetry, their desire to discover vaccines, their conviction that they can make the world a better place. I was once one of those girls applying to college. That was 30 years ago, when applying to college was only a tad more difficult than signing up for a membership at the Y. Today is complicated. It's a prolonged dance that begins early. And for young women, there is little margin for error. A grade of C in Algebra 2 Trig, off to the waitlist you go. Rest assured that admission officers are not cavalier in making these decisions. Last week, the 10 officers at my college, we sat around a table 12 hours every day, deliberating the applications of hundreds of these talented young men and women while gulping down coffee and poring over stats. We heard about a young woman from Kentucky we were not yet ready to admit outright. Leader, president, editor, captain, lead actress in every activity in her school. She had taken 6 advanced placement classes and had been selected for a prestigious state leadership program. In her free time, this whirlwind of achievement had accumulated over 300 hours of community service in 4 organizations. Few of us sitting around the table were as talented as directed as this 17-year-old young woman. Unfortunately, her test scores and grade point average placed her in the middle of our pool. We had to have a long debate before we decided to write admit beside her name. Had she been a male applicant, there would have been little, if any, hesitation to admit her. This is the reality because young men are rarer. They are more valued applicants. Today, 2/3 of colleges and universities report they get more female than male applicants, and more than 56% of undergraduates nationwide are women. So funny. It goes on to say demographers predict by 2009, which is so long ago,
Yes, right.
only 42% of bachelors will be awarded to men. Then she says, we have told today's young women that the world is their oyster. The problem is so many of them believed us that the standards for admission to today's most selective colleges are stiffer for women than men. How's that for an unintended consequence of the women's liberation movement? The elephant that looms large in the middle of the room is the importance of gender balance. Should it trump the qualifications of talented young female applicants? And those colleges that have reached what the experts call a tipping point, where 60% or more of the enrolled students are female, you hear a hint of desperation in the voices of admission officers. Beyond the availability of dance partners for the winter formal, gender balance matters in ways both large and small on a residential campus. Once you become decidedly female in your enrollment, 1, fewer males want to come, and 2, fewer females find your campus attractive. So what are the consequences of young men discovering that even if they do less, they have more? What messages are we sending young women that they must, nearly 25 years after the defeat of the Equal Rights Amendment, be even more accomplished than men to gain admission to the nation's top colleges? These are the questions that admissions officers like me are grappling with. In the meantime, I'm sending out waitlist and rejection letters for nearly 3,000 students. Unfortunately, a majority of them will be female, young women, just like my daughter. I linger over these letters, remembering individual students I've met, essays I've loved, accomplishments I've admired. I know all too well that parents will ache when their talented daughters, read the letters and will feel a bolt of anger at the college admissions officers who didn't recognize how special they were. Yes, of course, these talented young women will all find their place and attend some college. Maddie has 4 acceptances in hand, but it doesn't quite dilute the disappointment they feel when they receive a rejection or waitlist offer. I admire the brilliant success of our daughters to parents and students getting thin envelopes. I just apologize for the demographic realities. And so I just want to say one thing, David, and then get your comments. So the reason why that was it landed like a bombshell, because people were furious at her. Like, how dare you treat women, how you have a different standard for women versus men. And their arrows were coming out for her. She just told the truth. And so one reason why you don't hear a lot of talk about this is because you get a lot of blowback when you pull the curtain back and you expose the way it actually is. So I've been talking a long time. I want to hear your thoughts.
Well, this is hard because the other question it raises is, why are men failing? And that we can't address that in this podcast.
Yeah, let's leave that for another time, Dave.
Yeah, we got
to focus on. But that's a good point. We should come back to that.
Yeah. So on the one hand, it's harder for women, but on the other hand, men are not competitive. So I'd like to actually segue into the other thing that I think is more actionable, which is why we actually give so much emphasis to Division III athletic programs that don't obviously give a financial benefit to the school.
Let me make a comment. I want to make at least a comment on that article.
Okay.
So this is the dilemma that colleges face.
Yeah.
Is, it was in that article. You say that's not fair, but the problem is if you become too female,
right,
both men and women don't want to come.
Right. So
it makes schools have to try to be closer to gender balance, which means that it's easier for men to get in. Now, there are exceptions to this. Yeah, the opposite is true if we're talking about programs like engineering, computer science, male-dominated professions. But I really wanted to take time to read that article because I don't know if people realize just how much more competitive it is for women than men, especially in certain majors and especially at a lot of colleges that aren't like math science centric in their programming.
Well, I remember to that point reading an article about UNC, University of North Carolina. That's an outstanding state school, but I believe they passed the tipping point of greater than 60% women, or very close, about a decade ago. And there was a lot of conversations about how difficult it was for women to get into UNC because they were really desperately trying to gender rebalance that school. Have you heard anything about the UNC in that regard?
Yeah, and the one that really hit me was Columbia because within 20 years of Columbia going co-ed, it was harder for women to get in than men. When just 20 years previously, it had been all male.
Right.
So, this is just a reality. And once again, this is a former male admission director at an elite school looking back and saying, these are the things I wish that the public knew.
Right.
But go ahead, Dave. You want to make the point about athletics, and we'll call it a day.
Yeah, you've talked about this in several podcasts. There's a whole host of athletic programs. We'll mention a few: crew, fencing, rugby, lacrosse, polo, skiing, tennis, horseback riding, that clearly benefit a very elite socioeconomic subgroup that do not obviously convey financial benefits to the rest of the campus. This is not Alabama football that gives $1 billion that's distributed evenly across the university proper, and that really benefits a very narrow demographic, white men. And why don't you discuss, you've mentioned it before, Mark, it has to do with the power structure and so forth, but why don't you just do a little recap of why these programs persist and why you anticipate they will continue to persist?
Well, Amherst College, which is a school that I love, but a surprising stat for people, little Amherst College, 2,000 students, Western Mass, highly selective liberal arts and science college. Do you know they have more spots for recruited athletes than the University of Alabama? Like, who would think that? You think of University of Alabama, that's football powerhouse, all those spots going to all those people. No, little Amherst College gives more athletic scholarships away. And it has to do with a lot of things. It has to do with who has power. It has a lot to do with who has power. Alumni played these sports at these schools. They give money sometimes because of their memories, and they want to continue to see programs be strong. That's how they remember, the great days. I differentiate from a little bit. I do believe that sports do bring a certain something to a college campus. I do believe that they bring the community together in a way that produces esprit de corps. I also believe that they, unite alumni. And I also think that they provide some real work-life balance so that, you can not just be all studies. So I do see value to athletics. But what he points out is there's a lot of obscure sports that don't necessarily bring the community together. They don't draw very many people to come watch them. Okay. And they're oftentimes sports that, are correlated with a lot of wealth. And you mentioned some, and there's many, many others we can mention as well. And they're gobbling up spots. And so why is that? I think it's a vestige of the old power structure. I can assure you, if all those spots were going to people that were not power brokers in the system, that would not happen. Yeah. So I think it's a little bit of a carryover from who has power and who's going to continue to have power. And it's especially problematic at smaller schools because it just becomes such a large percentage of the actual students.
I think you mentioned that Williams College had about a third of its spots related to athletic programs. Is that correct?
Well, so I want to be careful about this. A third doesn't mean that a third of the kids got in on an athletic hook. Okay. So there's kids that get in on an athletic hook, meaning the coach wanted you. And so they put an extra thumb on the scale and you were considered somebody who was bringing something extra. And so you weren't really competing by the same admission standard because you were bringing something valuable to the campus. That's closer to a sixth of the population. And there's about another sixth that walk on and make a team and they participated on the team, but it wasn't necessarily a determinative factor in them getting into it. But still, that's still a lot of people. Yeah. Because by the time you gobble up all your spots for legacies, that's just a protected class, which oftentimes, has a history of privilege. And then athletes, especially if you're coming in obscure affluent sports, that's a lot of spots.
It is.
And once again, what I don't want to imply to anybody is if you're using any of these angles to get in, there's something wrong for that. You know what? This is the way the game is played. And part of being strategic is using whatever resources you have. But the point of this article is we like to think of admissions as a meritocracy, and it's really closer to aristocracy than a meritocracy. And these are some of the reasons why you end up with campuses that are so full of people from the top 1% of the socioeconomic pie. But I do want to say this. I think sometimes there's a stereotype of dumb jock when it comes to sports. And at a lot of these more academic schools, these kids are still quite talented and they graduate at very high rates. And so I think it's important that people don't just stereotype every athlete as somebody who is academically underwhelming. I just have to kind of say that.
No, but just recognize that as a group, they tend to be not as competitive. And if you took away their athletic protected status, you'd certainly see a significant drop in their admittance rates.
Well, and one of the points he makes, too, is this particularly also biases men again. Because one, he said the white female athletes, they tended to have stellar academic credentials.
Correct.
But just take something like football. That's a male sport. That's a sport that has more people on the team than any other sport. That automatically gobbles up a lot of spots just for men.
Well, I think we've covered. You want to put a bow on this?
Yeah, let's put a bow on it.
Sounds good.
Now it's time for our step-by-step walkthrough of the college admissions process.
So, Anika, did you follow through with your commitment and not watch the Super Bowl?
Absolutely, I did.
Well, you didn't miss anything.
I heard.
Gee. I went to Michigan State, so I do not like Tom Brady. I went to Michigan.
No.
So, anyway, let me not
There's
talk
so many
about it. When
Tom
you keep
Brady
talking about
haters
something,
out there. I don't even know
yes, and I'm one of
them.
them. You know how, when you keep talking about something, you get worked up?
Mm-hmm.
So I need to get off this topic. In fact, it's funny. I'll say this really quickly. We talk about anything on this podcast.
All right.
So, I did professional sales for 6 years with 2 Fortune 500 companies back in the 90s. And one of them taught us this thing called feel, felt, found. It was like this method. So you're supposed to meet the client and you're you're diagnosing their problem. And when you're diagnosing because you're going to provide the solution, right? You're going to try to make the sale. So when you're diagnosing the problem, one of the things you're supposed to do is to get them to start talking about it. Because as they start talking about it, they get all worked up. And then they're ready to So anyway, that's what was happening to me. I was going to go into it. I'm getting worked up.
Oh, my goodness.
So let's get off of that. I don't even know why I asked you that anyway. No more Super Bowl talk. Let's go to our countdown. So we are counting down the 10 schools that have the most current CEOs of Fortune 500 companies.
That's right. I was waiting for a Twitter thing. I forgot we moved on.
You are so yesterday. Get out of your time warp.
Whoops. All right, CEOs. Let's go.
You got your Obama's number one. Okay,
That's
you got
right.
Yeah, so we're doing the CEO thing, and I really thought, this is a nice little top 10 countdown. It's good. The only problem is 8 schools are tied at number 10.
Oh,
so we're
goodness.
working our way through the 8 schools tied at number 10. Last week it was Yale. This week it is the University of Illinois.
Really?
Champaign, Illinois. The school I haven't talked as much about as I should on here. I mean, that's some programs that can compete with any school in the country. They're strong. They're really, really strong.
What are they? Are they private or what are they?
No, that's a Big Ten school. So all the Big Ten schools are it's the flagship for Illinois.
Okay.
It's the flagship. So it's the UGA for Illinois. It's the UNC Chapel Hill for North Carolina. It's the flagship, just like, all your Ohio States for Ohio. They're the big boy on the block.
Okay.
Yep. So they come in there. And these schools that are tied at number 10, each of them have 5 current graduates that are current CEOs. This is based off a 2018 study. So don't shoot me if anything's changed in 19 or 20, but it's based off a 2018 study. All right, Anika. So we're doing something unique this week. This is a time when it's supposed to be their book chapter. I think we're just running out of gas on the book. We're on 160 out of 171. No, but what it is actually, 2 of the chapters I looked at that are coming up, including the one this week and one in a couple weeks, are things that we either just talked about or we talked about in more depth than I would do now, and I don't feel I'd be doing it justice. So Nick and I in our little pre-meeting, we said we're going to pass on our book chapter content today and put more time on the question from the listener. So what the question was supposed to be...
fair for them, though.
Yep.
It would have been about the ROTC scholarship,
correct.
Right? Okay.
Yeah, so it was supposed to be how to get an ROTC scholarship, and we're not ducking it, but what I want to encourage you to do is to go back and listen to interview number 45. All of our interviews are numbered. I think we're up to 65 or something like that now, but you can just go back, interview 45, just go to yourcollegemarketkid.com. You'll see the entire interview there. If you listen to it on your app, you're going to get part 1 and part 2 and part 3, but it's all together as one audio file. It's Rob Kirkland, and He works extensively with the ROTC scholarships. He has written an excellent book on it. He's a real guru. He's an expert. I thought he did a great job. In fact, I'm already in conversations about having him back because he's also an expert on getting into West Point. And so some of our listeners might be interested in, hey, tell me everything about going to West Point. That might be a good topic. So anyway, an interesting thing about my interview with him, Anika, was exactly a year ago.
Okay.
So first part of February 2020. So that's where you can go. You'll get much, much more in depth than we would cover here. So we're going to pass on that and put all of our time in something I'm super passionate about. So you want to tee it up, Anika?
Well, I don't know because you didn't give me much.
you can at least give what you got to something.
So let me just tell the world how Mark prepped me for this bonus content. So what we're going to talk about is Mark's words, something very important to colleges that he hasn't talked about enough in the past 159 episodes.
And the only reason I didn't tell Anika is because I've learned this with Anika and Dave. It's like sometimes podcasts are better if you just, the very first time you have a conversation about it, it's live.
That's true.
This is especially a problem with Dave because we talk almost every day and we don't talk that day. We'll talk twice the next day. And so we get into these great conversations. I'm like, save it for the podcast. It's not going to be as good.
You could have given me a little something, but okay, we'll give you that.
Yeah, I know. I could have given you a little something. But there's a reason why I didn't, because of how I want to tee it up.
Okay.
So let me ask you this question, Nika. How would you answer this question? And you can draw off of our 159 episodes, or you can draw off your own knowledge, but however you want to. What is it that admission officers are looking for?
They are looking for students who are going to add a certain quality of life to their very own classrooms. Good people, smart people, people that they can mold into being smarter people. What else are they looking for? Well-rounded people. I guess that's all in the same thing. That should pretty much sum it up, right?
Yeah, you took my thunder away. You know how you lay a trap for somebody and you're hoping they'll fall in it and they don't?
See, that's what you get.
Yeah, that's what I get. Now I wish I did tell you.
See?
I'm trying to set you up. So here's what I thought you were going to say. They're looking for students with good grades. They're looking for students with good academic rigor.
Well,
they're looking for students
too.
They're looking for students with excellent recommendations, and they're looking for students that have lots of great extracurriculars. They're looking for students that write really well, and they write these great essays. And you're looking for students that, if there's an interview, then they interviewed well. And you're looking for students that demonstrated interest, and they're looking for students that are they are strong in the major that they are applying for. That's what I thought you were going to say. And I was going to say, yes, that's true. And we've talked about that stuff ad infinitum. But there's something really, 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 really important that colleges look for. What I really want to talk about today is the importance of character in the evaluation process.
Okay.
You're not just admitting a test score or a number, although we know that there are schools that do that. Once again, we've talked about this before. There are schools that use what I call admissions by the numbers and what they often refer to as guaranteed admissions, or sometimes you'll see it called assured admissions, or sometimes you'll see it called formulaic admissions, where they're crunching numbers and admitting, right? So there are lots of schools that do that, especially sometimes some really large schools. But there are a lot of others that do holistic admissions. And that's what we're referring to today. And for schools that do holistic admissions, then this component of character is extremely important today. And so, but character is pretty amorphous, pretty nebulous. What do you mean when you say character? Are there specific character traits? Can you help me a little bit and not just say character? Because that's a little bit out there. I mean, I don't know what you're talking about. How can I try to work on something if you're not a little more lucid for me? So I, of course, you know me, Anika, so I have 13 things here. I got 13 character traits that are extremely, extremely valuable to colleges that do holistic admissions. And I'm just going to kind of go through them and mention them and get you to chime in from the peanut gallery.
Okie dokie.
So the first one is likability. And by the way, I got to give you a compliment. Both of your kids had incredible likability.
Aw, thank you.
And both you and your husband have it too. So I guess apple didn't fall far from the tree. Everybody likes Anika and Javon. It's true. You know it's true.
Many. I don't know about all.
Well, 99%. So here's a quote. You know, I have these 10 quotes in the start of my book, and I'm going to read 2 of them. Because I just love these quotes. These are my favorite admissions quotes. I'm going to read one now, and I'll read one a little later.
Okay.
Just happens to be, both of these quotes, it just happens to be from different Stanford admission officers. But this is one. It says, I mean, the most common test we had at Stanford was not how smart are they and what have they invented, but it was actually, would you want to share a dorm with this person for a year? And that speaks to likability. Mm-hmm. Because at the end of the day, you're in a community. And when you're likable, then everybody just wants to be around you, and you elevate the experience of everybody. Mm-hmm. You elevate the experience of everybody. And so this is an intangible thing, but it's something that is incredibly, incredibly important. And I'm going to talk about something a little similar to this a little bit later when we get down to point number 7. But any thoughts on likability, Anika?
Well, my question is, how do you convey likability? I mean, not everyone does an interview. So You don't write an essay, everybody likes me. But, I mean, is that your opportunity to talk about your collaboration and how successful your partnerships have been with your peers? Or how do you do that?
So it's a great question. Once again, we're talking about schools that do holistic admissions, right? So we're not talking about someone that just looks at your test score, your grades, and your curriculum and makes a decision. So there are a few really, really good opportunities for this. One is absolutely the essays. The essays, you learn a lot about somebody by how they write. I always say one of the unique, powerful things about the essay is your ability to emotionally connect with people. And a really good essay has the reader feeling, I want this kid on my campus. So the essays, called specific and personal statement, are a huge opportunity. Obviously, for schools that have interviews or video submissions, which is growing in its popularity, do the 90-second video, do the 2-minute video, which if I was in admissions, I'd absolutely have people do them. I look at a lot of this, clients I work with, and they put those together. You can actually learn a lot about somebody in 90 seconds to 2 minutes. Those are well worth it. Mm-hmm. So those are growing. And then there's another huge one, which is the recommendations. And that's teacher recommendations, school recommendations, outside recommendations. Okay. All of those things really give you a great picture, and you get a feeling for that, And it's even little things, like it's little subtle things, like, a student can just be talking about how much I love hanging out with my friends, on Saturday, and we have this thing where we have like a movie club and we watch a movie, then we all talk and we laugh. Something, you're getting the picture. It seems like everybody likes this kid. So it's like, you're not like going around saying, look at me, look at the big L on my shirt, I'm likable. Right. It's very, very subtle. Very subtle. In some instances, the admission counselor has met the student at a fair, in the lobby on a college visit, at their school on a high school visit. And the student formed a positive first impression, and the admission counselor remembers that encounter when reading the student's file. All right, number 2, you ready?
Yep.
Personal integrity. Huge. There's so much indiscretions that can happen on a campus. It doesn't matter how smart you are. It doesn't matter how talented you are. If you're a compromiser, then that's going to ding you. And if you have the opposite, then you're going to be really attractive. I mean, how serious schools take things like plagiarism, Right. How serious some schools, not all, but some schools take like drinking on the dorm and getting drunk on the dorm and that kind of stuff. Some schools take that stuff real serious. Stealing can be a problem that is like, oh my goodness, you talk about something that just completely destroys the culture, and someone's in the dorm and all of a sudden people keep losing $20, $50, $60 out of their wallet. And then, whoa, we got a thief amongst us. I'm talking about things I've seen over and over again. I've seen these things, and I've seen how they just completely shatter the whole trust component. And there's lots of other aspects of integrity, lying, not ever doing what you say. Here's what I teach my kids. I haven't taught now in 2 years, but I used to teach once a week. And I used to say there's 2 sides to the integrity coin. It's truth and it's trust. Because people think of integrity and they just think of the truthfulness side. Am I honest? But integrity is also that if you tell me that you're going to meet me in the library to study at 9:00, you show up. That's also integrity. That's the opposite side of the coin. It's truthfulness and trustfulness. So it's am I honest? Am I reliable? The whole thing about character, what you do in the dark, it's all of that, but it's also reliability, dependability.
Okay.
I heard something the other day, and I was going to try to get Dave on this and use it for the word. I do permissions vernacular, but then I never heard it anywhere else except for this one guy. And I started researching and looking it up, and I couldn't find anybody else that said it. So I said, that's too cold for me to try to use it on Dave. But but I was listening to this podcast. It was a financial podcast on stocks, and it was talking about Chegg, which is do you know what Chegg is, Anika? Okay, so Chegg is a company. I own the stock, but it's online. It was more online textbooks at one time, but now they've really gone into providing tutoring for kids to get some assistance for their school. Okay, and they have all kinds of programs. You can sign up for like $14.99 a month and get access to all kinds of help with your classes. And it's really, really, really growing fast. And of course, during the pandemic, it grew even more fast. It's like one of these stocks that like 2X'd, we call it, meaning it doubled like in the last year. So I was listening to this analyst talking about Chegg, and he was explaining the growth because all of these college kids are cheating by using Chegg. And he said they've even created a word for it now. It's called chegging. Chegging is like using Chegg to look up the answers because, the teacher asks you the question and you go on Chegg and get the answer. So I never found any evidence that that's true. That I looked it all up. I'm like, where are you getting the story? Everybody's using the term chegging now. so it won't make it into admissions vernacular, but it proves the point here about personal integrity. Any comments on that one?
Well, I was going to go back to the same question of how do you convey that? But I guess that sounds more like you don't have anything bad. People are just not saying anything bad in your recommendation and you don't have anything on your record. Is that how that comes through primarily?
So up until now, and Dave and I did a recent, was it you? Was it Dave or you? I can't remember which one of you. Oh, it was Dave. We did a recent, in the news on how schools are dropping effective next year.
Reviewing the disciplinary records.
Discipline, yeah. So that would have been one way to reveal some of it, but it is going to be the same things I said to you before. But mostly in this case, it's going to be more recommendations and also school records. So as part of the secondary school report, there are some questions that get answered there that can shed some light on this, but it's going to be what others say about you, mostly more than what you say about yourself.
Okay.
Anika and I are so grateful for everyone who has financially supported our podcast. It allows us to pay our staff and cover our other auxiliary expenses involved in having a weekly professional podcast.
At the start of every month, we're going to start sending a special gift to anyone who financially supports your college-bound kid.
I will be sending our donors this bonus content once a month directly to your email. The bonus content will be between 10 to 15 minutes in length. Usually it will be a college-related topic that I'm passionate about. Occasionally, it'll be another bonus hot topic in the news segment. Sometimes it'll be an answer to a question that one of our listeners submits to us via email.
And you'll receive these monthly audio blogs for a gift of any amount. We know that $5,000 to one person is $5 to someone else, and we don't want your budget to be a hindrance to you receiving this additional bonus content. So if you want to support our show, just go to yourcollegeboundkid.com and click the donate button. And if you've already financially supported our podcast, you will automatically start receiving this bonus content via your email.
This bonus content is our way of letting our financial supporters know in a tangible way how much we appreciate you. And if you have any questions at all about our monthly bonus content, just send your questions our way. That's to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Once again, questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Okay, the next one, adventuresome spirit. What do you think I mean by that, Anika?
Sounds like he's stepping outside of the box.
Yeah.
In some form or fashion, whether you tried something new on a research project or you did something, I don't know, just something very different.
So it's the kid that loves to explore things that they haven't had a chance to do before, and they're all into that. Whether that's study abroad or whether that's, joining a club, but but it's stepping outside of your comfort zone and being willing to do new things. So let's say, for example, I'm just making up something, So it's a school, it's in Vermont, and one of the things that they do is they have this day where everybody goes skiing, And so you got a kid from, Miami, Florida. I ain't been around any skiing in my life, and I have no interest at all versus, you know what, I'll get out and try it. Sure, it's something new. They love that attitude. Taking new courses you've never had, joining new clubs, trying new experiences. That just adds a lot. And I was just yelling at an officer recently, and she was saying, you know what we love? We love the kid that is going to take advantage of all of the resources that we offer. Who's gonna take advantage of what we offer? And that's what that adventuresome spirit is. It's not the kid that says, you know what? I got the same routines and I'm not venturing from them. I do what I do. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter what it is. Like I like business, so I'm only going to take business classes. I'm only going to be in Future Business Leader of America. I'm only going to do this, do that. And, I like watching football on Saturday. And that's what I do. And I'm a routine person and I'm not willing to break out of that. That's not really what they like. Nothing's wrong with having routines, but be willing to try new things. Any questions on that?
Nope, that one was good.
Number 4, positive mindset.
Of course.
I mean, that is something that, all of us are so contagious. And negative Neds, negative Nellies, negative Nancys, that spreads like a wildfire in a residential environment. And it's very bad. But the opposite's also true. I remember a long time ago, someone told me, if you can be the most positive person in your organization, that's one of the surefire paths to getting a promotion. And did I ever tell you my experience trying to sell cars?
No. This will be a first.
So I had 3.5 weeks where I was free and had I actually was about to start working at Westtown. It was like 2001. And I'd left my other job, which was selling Fortune 500 company. And I just had 3.5 weeks to kill because it made sense for me to leave right at the end of, a sales cycle. And then I had these 3.5 weeks. I said, well, I'll sit around. Let me see if I can make some money. I walked in this Mercedes-Benz place, right in Westchester. And I said, hey, I saw a sign out there, blah, blah, blah. And I'm not a car person, okay? So this is a little bit outside my comfort zone. Make a long story short, they hired me. And I just had 3.5 weeks before. And I told them, I said, listen, I don't have a lot of time because I'm about to start this other job, but, I can give you a month. And so to make a long story short, guess how many cars I sold in 1 month?
3.
0. I sold 0. But then so I was really embarrassed when I said, well, remember I told you about that opportunity? So, and then I was shocked. The guy said, it was a pleasure having you here because you had such a positive attitude. And I kind of feel like you rubbed off on the other people. And we kind of got some people that complain about everything. And I was like, wow, I made you because they paid me a salary. So I got paid. It was not a lot, but I got like $5,000. But it's $5,000 for 4 weeks. And I never made it. So I'm looking at you gave me $5,000 and I didn't bring a penny into you. I was embarrassed resigning. I said, look, I have this other opportunity that I think is going to come through. And anyway, I won't get on details. But positive attitude. I don't always have it, but I know that it's valued.
Yep, that's a good one.
Too many personal stories. Next, number 5, grit. This is huge for schools. So a while ago, and this is a book that we featured on our recommended resources before by Paul Tuff. We've done 2 of his books. They've always been New York Times bestsellers. He's excellent writer. I love his research. But he came out with a book, I'm going to say now, it's probably 7 years ago, I'm guessing. And it's called How Children Succeed. And then the subtitle is Grit, Curiosity, and the Hidden Power of Character. And the book just became a book that pretty much all schools were reading, their staffs were reading, colleges were reading, because it was based on a lot of research that showed the things that correlated the most with life success were not things like standardized tests, but whether or not kids had this set of characteristics. And grit was the one that was emphasized the most in the book. And grit is that quality of you have the ability to get back up when you're knocked down. And if you notice, Anika, there are a lot of college-specific questions that get at whether or not you have grit.
Hmm.
There are a lot of interview questions that get at whether or not you have grit. You know, like when I'm doing interview prep for people, I'll go over that. I'll say, tell me a time you experienced failure and how did you handle that? Because I know that's a common question they get asked.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll see a lot of questions like that also in writing. And they're trying to know whether you have that ability to take a punch and get back up. Because they know there could be one kid that, I'm just making this up, but you know, they've had straight A's their whole life. And now they get their first B- and now they want to transfer. And there could be another kid that one parent dies when they're in college. You know, the other parent is, you know, diagnosed with cancer and on life support. And, you know, the family goes bankrupt and everything. And that kid perseveres to the end. You know, and it's like one kid, you know, is like, can't take a punch. And the other one, you know, can have Mike Tyson beating on them. They're still winning. So colleges know that they're trying to graduate people. And this ability to bounce back, you know, when you're knocked down is really, really valuable. A lot of times people just call it perseverance. Thoughts?
Mm-hmm. You gave me a Mr. Pryor Kip flashback with the grit.
Yeah, because it came from that. Because when we were, so this is Anika and I doing inside baseball. So I met Anika when I was working at a school called Kip South Fulton Academy, and her kids were there, and she was the PTSA president, and the principal of our school is Mr. Pryor. And he was always talking about grit. And the reason why is because as a staff, we had to read this book and talk about it at faculty meeting.
Okay.
And so we're trying to incorporate all of this into our education. So that's where that came from.
And it worked, by the way.
There you go. It worked on the parent and the kid, apparently. Got to the parents.
Oh, yeah.
Number 6 is work ethic. You know, at the end of the day, hard work is just, I mean, you know, the old story way back when you were a kid about the hare and the tortoise. The tortoise ends up beating the hare, just plugging away. And, you know, at the end of the day, schools are trying to invest in people that are going to do well at the school, but also go out into the real world and be difference makers.
Right.
And so a lot of these things are correlated not only to doing well at the school, but also to doing well in life.
Right.
Number 7, and this is somewhat it's like the cousin of the likability, ability to get along with people who are really different from you. This is really important. Once again, you'll notice there are a lot of college-specific questions that are kind of geared at this sort of thing as well. You look at what they're trying to get at. This is, you know, yeah, we know that you're a suburban kid and, you know, from life outside the city, above average income, and that's but mostly your peer group. But can you get along with the rural kid? Can you get along with the kid from the inner city? Can you get along with the kid from Singapore, you know, or from, you know, Pakistan or from, you know, Nigeria? You know, can you get along with the artist and the athlete? Can you get along with the techie kid? Can you get along with the, you know, name all the different types of kids? Like, can you mix with them? Because the college is a mixture of everybody. And so the ability to like get along with all kinds of different types, whether it's socioeconomically, whether it's interests, whether it's race, ethnicity, religion, geography, culture. Can you get along with people who are different than you? And this is the adventure. This is how these two sort of intertwine with the adventuresome spirit. This is another thing, adventuresome spirit. Do you want to interact with people who are different than you? Do you want to get to know those kids? Are you intrigued by people who have backgrounds that are different than you and you want to get to know them? All those things are valuable to schools. Comments, Anika?
No, that's a good one. I was just thinking about, I like the way you dove more into the diversity of, you know, not just being black, white, or whatever, but like you said, the techie versus the artist.
All of that, religious.
Yeah.
You know? You know, like, okay, you're Christian. What about the Buddhist? What about the Hindu? What about the atheist? What about, you know what I mean? You know, agnostic, like all that. Yeah, all of it. Okay. Friends, this is already our first 2+ hour episode in over 6 months. Our last one was August 20th. But it would be over 2.5 hours if we didn't stop here. So next week, we'll have a second part of our conversation about some of the character traits that admission counselors value. Okay, friends, I'm very excited about this interview with my friend Julia Esquivel, and it's a 6-parter. We just talked. I record it, and then I looked, I was like, ooh, we went over 2 hours. We'll chop it into 6 parts and we'll just go 6 straight weeks with it. So in this part 1, Julie opens up their backstory. She talks about the difference between being a full-time admission counselor versus being an outside reader. I introduced the topic, how to work more effectively with your school counselor. Julia explains what the secondary school report is. And we talk about the school profile. What is it and how is it used by admissions counselors? Listen and enjoy.
And now, this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, I'm here with Julia Esquivel, and she is a college counselor at Milton Academy, and you're in for a real treat today. Welcome to the Your College Bound Kid podcast, Julia.
Thanks, Mark. I'm excited.
Well, our most attentive listeners may remember I came on here once and I talked about one of my favorite college counselors, and I had a little side bet, no money, about what would be the first Ivy to go test optional. And Julia nailed it when she said Cornell, and I gave her a shout out. So I had to bring her on so you could benefit from all of her wisdom. But Julia, why don't you start by taking a few minutes, tell us about your backstory, where you grew up, educational background, different admission and counseling roles you've had, anything you really want to talk about, college or non-college related.
Sure. So I grew up in central Massachusetts, which some people would call Western Mass, but by no means is it Western Massachusetts. The area I grew up in was a little bit rural, a little bit suburban. So I went to a regional high school, 3 different towns in it. From there, I went to Vassar College and majored in women's studies, which was thrilling for my mom. She was so happy about that choice. I loved it. I do believe that everyone has a different relationship with college, but I can say that it was a really important 4 years of my life. So because it was so important, I cared a lot about admissions and the admission officers that got me to Vassar. So I went and worked in admissions, and I loved the small liberal arts model. So I worked for Haverford College for 4 years. And I will say that Haverford was my second choice school if I was going to pick another college after Vassar. So it was nice to work there. At Haverford, I did multicultural recruitment, did some QuestBridge. It was really great to work for that school. It was truly some of the best time of my life. I then actually left admissions and I went to Emory to get my master's of public health. And while I was at Emory, I got to read applications for them as an outside reader. So that was fun to see a larger institution and how that worked. I left admissions and worked in public health for a couple more years, but I actually read files for Haverford as an outside reader for them for 2 seasons, and then came back to admissions. I could not stay away. So this is my 5th year at Milton Academy. It's a half-day, half-boarding independent school right outside of Boston, and I'm a college counselor there. And I've been there since. So I've been in admissions for about 12 years or so.
Great. A few questions. So were you involved like in tour guiding or anything like that at Vassar? Did you do any of that stuff, or were you sort of not involved in the admissions office at Vassar?
Yes, great question. I lived in that office. Those were all my favorite people. So I got to Vassar on one of their fly-in programs for multicultural students, is what they were calling it back then. And so I worked in the office as a student of color intern for 4 years while I was at Vassar. And so we would lead our fly-in programs when those were a thing, and sort of meet with BIPOC prospective students. So it was a great time working in that office as a student.
Yeah. And tell us about the interest in public health. Where did that come from?
Yeah, that's the women's studies major. So when I was studying in college, I was really interested in the health of LGBT populations, and going to school for public health allowed me to really think about infusing science with social sciences and trying to make a real change in the world and make sure that LGBT folks lived healthy lives and were less marginalized by things like the HIV epidemic and whatnot. So that's where my interest in public health came from. So I worked actually in HIV research and HIV epidemiology for specifically gay men and trans women for about 4 years or so. And then my current dean at Milton Academy, Rod Skinner, always likes to say, I just really like interviewing people and trying to help them get where they need to go. So to me, there was a parallel between public health and admissions, very much so.
No, this is great. Now, one thing I never heard you mention, you're a marathon runner. Tell us about it.
Yeah. It's been a little bit since then. I don't know what I was thinking, but I signed up for a marathon in October. And the first year I did college counseling, which is when we're all holed up, writing letters of recommendation, but I finished. I was actually, it's a funny story, I was deathly ill the day of the marathon.
Oh my goodness.
I had an 102 fever. And so I decided I ran the Chicago Marathon, which is, fun fact, the flattest marathon out there. And so I thought, you know what, I'll just try. I'll start running, and if I have to duck out, I will. And I ended up finishing. It was slower than I planned, but I ended up finishing.
That says a lot about you. You ran your first marathon with 102 fever.
Yeah, horrible. I would not recommend it.
You got some determination in those bones.
Yeah, I think I sweated it out at the very end of it all.
You know, before we dive into our topic today, Julia, and I share a little bit about how you and I met, I'd love for you to actually talk a little bit about the difference between being a full-fledged admissions counselor, and, a seasonal reader, or outside reader. Can you, because that's something I think a lot of our listeners may not know the difference. And I think it'd be interesting for them to talk about that, because you've done both, right? You've been an outside reader at both Haverford and Emory, and then you've been a full-blown admissions officer for 4 years as well. So if you could talk about that, I think they'd find that interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. It was definitely interesting for me. I was very lucky when I worked at Haverford in that it's a smaller school. So we had the bandwidth to really carefully consider with time every single applicant. So I would spend 30 minutes or so on a file, and it was rare if I didn't actually know the student I was reading. I either met them in a high school visit, I had them in an interview, they came on a fly-in program. So it was actually very contextual and a very personal process. And so my favorite part of being an admission officer was the committee room. I loved coming to committee and reviewing every single one of the students in my caseload and advocating for those students as well. So what's weird when you're an outside reader is that I don't know, I've never met this student. I might not know their high school like I did when I was an admission officer, because you read regionally. So you usually visit that school or have a sense of that location. When I read for Emory, it was the year of Sandy, and their regional rep for Long Island couldn't go visit that year. So we teamed up together because I had some understanding of Long Island schools, but not as much as if I had visited and been there and met these students. So being an outside reader, one thing that's sort of a bummer is that I don't know what's going to happen to that application. I don't know who reads it next and what they'll see and what they think and what's going to happen in the committee room. But it is really comforting to know that I think in almost every situation, there's at least more than one set of eyes on your application. So even though I was the outside reader at Emory or Haverford, it went to the main reader who knows that region and maybe has met that student and also sees the bigger context of the pool. And as an outside reader, I might not make recommendations, right? I might just say, here's a synopsis of what I read. Here's how I feel about the essays, about their extracurriculars, about their transcript. Whereas the main reader admission officer will see the whole pool of things. So I never know what happened to those applications or how they were looked at after I read them. So that was one of the main differences.
Yeah. And one thing, our listeners may be wondering, why would a school have outside readers? It's a way of managing your caseload without having to hire, 50 extra employees. When you have the glut of applications that come in. And I know when we did the interview with Lisa Prescott, director of admission at UC Santa Barbara. I don't want to misquote, but it was a outrageous number of outside readers that they used to handle their over 100,000 applications that they have. So,
right.
Yeah, awesome. So let me talk a little bit about how I met Julia. So I had 5 students I was working with that were at Milton Academy. It's a school that I really love, a boarding school in Milton, Mass. And so we co-counseled together. I would share what I knew. She would share what she knew. And then I also had the privilege of working with some other super incredible members of her team, such as Rod Skinner, who Julia mentioned before, and Amy Kirkcaldy and others on her team. And I have publicly said, I think you guys have the best college admission staff in the country. I'm not just saying that to you. I've said it to others. I love how you guys work. You cooperate. You share all your knowledge. It's kind of amazing. And so just in working together with Julia, we just would share all our notes and worked cooperatively. And then we built a friendship and decided to just keep in touch, even when we don't have students. So that's how we met. Is that fair, Julia?
I think so. Yes. Yeah. We were destined, I think, at some point because we have parallel. I was in Atlanta. We were in Philly area together. Yes. We just keep missing each other.
Exactly.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Friends, have you ever wondered what summer programs are out there that are a great match for your child's gifts and talents? I've been actually communicating with a summer program specialist about coming on my School Match for You team just to focus on finding great summer programs for the students I work with. But for now, our recommended resource will be a link with over 100 great summer programs. The programs are mostly arranged based on the colleges that host the camps, but there are other camps besides the ones that are hosted by the colleges that are also included here. The URL is too long for me to read out, but we'll put the link up on our yourcollegeboundkid.com website. Just go under the resources tab. When you get to resources, click the websites tab, and you'll see this great link to over 100 summer programs. So I've actually been talking to Julia for better part of a year now. You got to come on the podcast. Got to come on the podcast. And there's so many topics that she could speak to. Friends, anytime you have somebody that's been on both sides of the desk, they just have an insight into this whole admission process. So, most recently you've heard from Amin Gonzalez and Sam Prouty, a couple of people recently we've had on. They've done both admissions and college counseling. You just have such a unique insight because you've worked with the teenagers. You see what they're like when they're 16, 17, and 18. And then you've been on the school side. And so what we thought together would be a great topic would be understanding the role of the school/college counselor in the college process. And I just thought that would make a lot of sense. So, Julia, I know when you were doing admissions at both Haverford or whether you were file reading for Haverford or Emory, what the school counselor had to say played a big role in putting the student in context. So one of the things that schools submit is what's called a secondary school report. So can you explain what the secondary school report is so our listeners can know what information is in that secondary school report? And when you were in admissions, what you looked for when you were reading a secondary school report?
Sure. So the secondary school report will be prepared by your school. So it's done by your school counselor or your college counselor. And it gives a brief snapshot of you as well as the school that you're in. So the first questions tend to be how many students might graduate from your high school and attend a 4-year college or a 2-year college, how many APs or honors classes are offered, what the highest GPA might be. And then there's some questions about the students. And some schools decide to fill this part out and some decline. My school is one that declines, but there's some rating questions like this student, I highly recommend the student, or I recommend the student. I enthusiastically recommend the student, or it can qualify sort of what the student's transcript or curriculum might look like. It can also let the reader know where the student is compared to perhaps other students in their class or other students in the counselor's career. So that is sort of helpful for us in understanding the context of what a student is in. So if you go to a high school where there's maybe 1,400 students in the senior class, that's going to be really different kind of counseling and a different experience than, say, my students who have basically 40 students to one college counselor. So it's helpful for the admissions officer to understand what your school is like and how you are compared to your school. There's also a disciplinary question on the secondary school report form, which will be thrown out next year in Common App, but that is less used by admission officers than the rest of the part of the secondary school report. So it's really helpful in understanding what your school is like and how you compare to your school.
And I know some schools will send more of a prose narrative where they'll write a couple paragraphs and add that rather than just check boxes. What was your experience like as an admission officer? Did you like those? Did you not like those? I know really large schools that don't have the capacity to do those, but what were your thoughts on more of the prose narratives that some schools do? I know when I was doing this at Westtown Boarding School, we were kind of known for really long prose narratives that I think as the applications got more and more piled up, people started pushing back and saying, please keep them to one page. But what are your thoughts on those, Julia?
Yeah, I think every admission officer hopes to read and meet every school where they're at. So if you go to a school that maybe doesn't have the same resources as mine, where you're not able to provide a huge amount, or the counselor is not able to provide a huge amount of information, we won't hold that against the student. And in fact, it's actually really helpful to know that, yeah, you probably didn't walk into your school counselor's room all the time, or someone might not have advised you to take certain courses. The narrative style can be helpful, but Mark, you're right in that I'm not sure how many people work for a place that isn't like Haverford College and they have maybe 8 minutes on a file in total, right? So being able to hear or read all of that narrative style can sometimes be a hindrance, but oftentimes that's very helpful for contextualizing the school, especially a place like a Westtown, or one of my favorite examples is St. Anne's in Brooklyn. It does not have grades.
I remember getting those St. Anne's, no grades in long narratives when I was in admissions.
Yes. So you sort of have to go with that. But no one should be disadvantaged because of the choice the school makes. I do believe that most admission offices try to make a best effort as they can to meet the school where they're at with whatever information that they are given.
Thank you. And another thing that's very common is the school profile. Some people call it the college profile, that oftentimes is submitted with the secondary school report with a transcript. When you were in admissions and you got a school profile, what did you look for? And maybe you should take a step back and tell our listeners some of the kinds of things that are included on the school profile.
Sure. So almost every high school in the U.S. has a school profile. It can be something as small as one page, and it can be a book at some other schools. And the school profile will contain a lot of the same information that the secondary school report has, but with a lot more context. So yes, you might offer 10 APs at your schools, but what APs are those? That will be in the profile. What is the average sequence for a student at your school? That in terms of curricular choices, that would be in the school profile. Average SAT scores or ACT scores. What perhaps are the most rigorous classes at each high school? I know my high school, for example, we don't really offer AP or honors in everything. So that does not mean that's the most rigorous version if you have an honors distinction. So we qualify that in our school profile. The school profile also explains the mission of the school. So sometimes I find that fun to sort of read, especially like Montessori schools or something that has a non-traditional format. Then it's easy to sort of understand how that student is in the school. I would not compare one student from one high school to another student at a different high school. And the school profile is my best way of doing that, because if you go to a public high school that offers 30-something APs, I think your curriculum should probably look different than a student who goes to a small high school that offers one AP. I don't expect you to have 30 APs because that's not an option for you. And I find that information in the school profile. And then the school profile sometimes also has what's called a grade distribution chart. So some schools don't offer rankings or a GPA, and sometimes GPA and rankings is an incomplete picture of the strength of a student. So the school profile will also explain maybe, okay, in honors biology this year, only 2 kids got an A range grade and the majority are getting B range grades. So that gives me an understanding that, hey, this is kind of a hard class and I should not expect that perhaps the best students get an A range grade. So we usually readers use the profile to really investigate how a student is compared to their high school and really dig in. So when I worked for Haverford, I would spend, if I wasn't already familiar with the school, I would spend maybe 5 to 10 minutes digging into that school profile. And that's also the beauty of having multiple readers is every now and then you'd have someone miss something in the profile. I remember I once did that. I did that for collegiate in New York. They don't have rankings, and I guess that this kid was the top 50% of their high school. And I was like, we don't take top 50% at Haverford. The student goes to committee, everyone votes to admit them. And they're like, Julia, we take the top 50% from collegiate at Haverford. But I hadn't done, my due diligence in reading thoroughly through that profile to really understand what the caliber of the student was. So it's sort of our way, or it's sort of readers' way of really ascertaining where a student is in the high school and what the high school offers and what to expect out of their top kids and their other grade kids. And that way you can really know that you're being fair in the process, or as fair as possible.
Next week in the news, we will tackle points 5 and 6 of the article in Vox by Jason England, The Mess That Is College Admissions. Our question from a listener is from a mom in Wisconsin on what are some of the red flags when looking for a college that will signal that this is not the best school for you. Our interview will be part 2 of 6 with Julia Esquivel, college admissions counselor at Milton Academy, on how to work more effectively with your school counselor. And our college spotlight will be the University of Utah.
In Salt Lake City. First time we go to Utah. Trying to hit every state we haven't hit. I'm trying to look and say, what's the state we haven't hit yet? And try to, pick a school from each state. So we're trying to do that. So thank you for listening, everybody. And we'll see you next week.
See you next week, guys.
Friends, we are in for a special treat today. We're here with Dr. Lisa Rouff. And you regular listeners know she was on 4 episodes in a row, probably about 2 months ago. And maybe about 3 weeks ago, she did the spotlight with me on SLU. And we got such a great response. I recruited her, and she's going to be doing a lot more spotlights for us. She actually just joined me in my private college counseling practice. It's School Match for You. So we're the 2 counselors on the team. And this was going to be a big announcement, but I may as well say now you're going to see her with a much more expanded role on the podcast. So excited to have Dr. Lisa Rouff, relationship specialist, anxiety, depression, perfectionist specialist, college counselor, all of those things.
Oh, Mark, you're so flattering.
But it's true. And here today to talk to us about her alma mater. And I'm really interested for you to talk about it, if it's the same as when you went. But go ahead and do it your own way, whatever you want to say. I'm all ears.
Oh, well, thanks so much for having me, Mark. I love being on the podcast. And I also love talking about the University of Chicago, which I attended from 1987 to 1991. It's a great school, and some things are the same, some things are different, and I can't wait to tell you all about it. I'd like to start off with the history of the school. The University of Chicago was founded in 1890 as a private research institution, and it was founded on the city of Chicago's South Side in the Hyde Park neighborhood. It was started by the American Baptist Education Society, who got a grant from John D. Rockefeller, and the land was donated by Marshall Field, who used to own Marshall Field's, a large retail department store in Chicago. Now, it replaced the old University of Chicago, which burned down in 1886. Anyone who knows much about Chicago knows that buildings burning down is a recurring motif in Chicago history. So that also happened to the University of Chicago. And that's why its coat of arms includes a phoenix rising from the ashes of the fire. And the phoenix is actually an unofficial school mascot now, and his name is Phil. The Baptist roots of the school were the foundation for the Divinity School, which was formed in 1891 and is still functioning to this day. Another point in history that was important for the University of Chicago was the formation of the Common Core. The Common Core is a very serious, multidisciplinary set of requirements. It was started in 1930s by its president at the time, Robert Hutchins. He was really serious about academics. He was so serious that he got rid of the varsity football team in an attempt to emphasize academics over athletics. And I'll get more into the Common Core in a little bit, but it's got humanities, social sciences, science, civilization, language, a gym class, and you have to do all that to graduate. And the classes are small. They're capped at 19 students. You usually read only primary texts. And now you can fulfill these also during study abroad times. The college also had the first woman college president ever, Hannah Holborn Gray, and she shook my hand and signed my diploma when I graduated.
Nice.
Yeah, no, it's very cool. I don't think she remembers me, though.
She might be a podcast listener. You never know.
I'm kind of, I don't know.
If she's still with us.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Okay.
I'm not, I have to look that up. I hope she is. So the University of Chicago's mascot is an abstract concept, which makes sense if you know anything about the place. It's the color maroon. And they picked that color in 1894 because they picked a color before that and it was goldenrod yellow. But it was a problem because when they were playing on the field, the football team, they would sweat and the yellow dye would run. And the opposing team started mocking them and making kind of gross comments. And so the coach of the football team at that time decided that they would have to change the color to maroon. And so that's how it became the University of Chicago Maroons. And as I mentioned, there is also an unofficial mascot, which is the Phoenix, who goes by the name of Phil. And Phil will attend sporting events and other events at the University of Chicago. Right now, the University of Chicago has one undergraduate college and has 8 graduate research institutions and 8 professional schools. And there's like a business school, medical school, social sciences school, public policy, divinity school, and the Pritzker School of Molecular Engineering, which is their newest school. When you go into the University of Chicago, you apply just to the college. You don't apply to a major, and you can get in there and pick whatever major or minors or combination of that you'd like. In addition to the Hyde Park campus, they also have campuses in London, Paris, Beijing, New Delhi, Hong Kong, and also in the River North neighborhood of Chicago's downtown. And they also do a lot of work with Fermilab, which is located in the Chicago suburbs. Now, the University of Chicago is the site of many scientific breakthroughs. Most notably, they produced the first man-made self-sustaining nuclear reaction, and they did that under the stands of the football fields. So I don't think anyone was playing football at that time, which was important. But they basically invented the nuclear reaction. And the University of Chicago has the 4th most Nobel laureates of its faculty, students, and staff in the world. It has 100 Nobel laureates in its association, which is amazing. Now, the University of Chicago has a reputation for being academically rigorous, and pretty much everyone will tell you it's where fun goes to die.
I was going to ask you about that. So, like that's there's something where some people wear that T-shirt almost like a badge of honor, but
yes.
then other times I'm working with students and they're like, I don't want to go where fun goes to die. I want to have fun.
Right.
It reminds me of Swarthmore colleges like that on the East Coast. And I was working with a student. Oh, this is a long time ago. And a student I was really close with, and he graduated from high school in 2007. And he was looking at Swarthmore and he was like, they had these T-shirts, in the bookstore. Our library never closes. Anywhere else, it's a B here. Everywhere else, it's an A. And he's like, I don't want to go there.
That was my second choice.
Look at you. So you are meant for these schools.
I have problems, man. I got problems.
No, I don't. I respect it highly because I think of Chicago as a place where they're like wicked smart people who absolutely love to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Love to learn. And it's really nice that you don't have to come in declaring a major or anything, and that you can explore the whole entire curriculum, at least with your electives. And
yeah,
you know,
really get exposed to all the different disciplines. And I don't think anyone asked me to declare a major until my junior year of college. So that really gave me a lot of time to explore. And I went through like 7 majors on the way to psychology. So
that's what's good. You can like discover yourself through trying lots of courses. But let's go back to this fun goes to die. Like, is that fair or is that unfair in your opinion?
Well, I definitely think, I went there a long time ago, and I think that was fair. In the house, in my dorm, they made T-shirts for a fundraiser, and I still have it. It's one of my favorite T-shirts that says, "The University of Chicago, hell does freeze over."
You kept it all this time?
I do. I have kept it all this time.
That's impressive. That means you haven't gained weight. That's impressive.
I didn't say I was still wearing it, but I still have it.
Okay.
But, I do think that's how it was. I do think the university has done a lot to try to change that image and try to change the student experience. They've built a lot of new dorms that are really beautiful, and they have more organized social events on campus, and they brought back football.
That's big.
But to me, based on what I can tell, it's still got the same high level of academic rigor, and the grading still seems hard. I know someone who is a TA. She's a chemistry graduate student, and she's a TA in the chemistry class, the basic chemistry class. And she tells me that those kids are, like the average grade on a test will be like a 45%.
Well, it's interesting you say that because our team, we have such a great podcast team. We had 2 options for this podcast. We had you, of course, and I picked you with your college background and you're graduating there. But I've stayed at Dave's house. You can throw a stone from Dave's house and hit Chicago. That's how close he lives, And so that's usually when I go there is when I go by to visit him. And the architecture is amazing. I just
it's beautiful.
Love that neo-Gothic, quad sort of in the quad, and the library is just, I have to admit, that's stunning. So you're familiar with the lab school, of course, where Dave's daughter Lauren went. And the lab school is like a feeder right into Chicago, right? All those professors go there. And so Lauren is in touch with all her classmates. And she's like, some of these kids are really smart, and some of them are pre-med. And she's in touch with them about how low their grades are. And she's like, I'm glad I'm at Yale. They don't grade like that over here.
I don't know how it all ends up at the end of the semester if they curve it, because that would put these kids at a disadvantage for med school applications. And
I know they do well with graduate school placement, so somehow it must work out.
The graduate schools must know, that the grading system is a little different there. It's an academically rigorous place, and it has typically attracted intellectuals who love to debate ideas, and they don't mind going to the library on Saturday nights. That's where the social life when I went to school was at the library on Saturday nights.
And that's great because, we all work with these kids. Like, I have a kid that I worked with last year is at Columbia right now. And I was thinking, I bet he just would have loved Chicago, just because he just is that kid. Like, one of his applications, and this, you see this on Columbia and actually on Harvard's application, where ask you to list all the books that you've read, all the books that you've read for fun. And the list is so long. He took more than one 8.5 by 11 page single space.
Fantastic.
And like, I know that's like a Chicago kid there too, right?
Exactly.
So I want to ask you about the house system, which I know is really important there. And also, and I know you mentioned you're going to do this. I want you to go into more depth about the core, because I know those are 2 of the really distinctive features.
Sure. Well, the dorms at the University of Chicago are divided into houses. So at the University of Chicago, freshmen and sophomores are required to live in the dorm. And then also they do reserve housing for upperclassmen as well. And many of them elect to stay in the dorm. And there are 39 residential houses, and they each have their own traditions. So my house had its own traditions, and we did a lot of things together. And it was really great, especially that first quarter of college when I didn't know anybody. I had my housemates to pal around with, and that was very helpful. The house is also there's a really great tradition at the University of Chicago called scavenger hunt. And it is the largest scavenger hunt in the world. And houses compete against each other, trying to find the most ridiculous and difficult to find things all over the city of Chicago. Things like an elephant, a live elephant, have been on the list. When I was there, our list included a coffin, and one of my housemates was quite wealthy. And so he went out and rented a coffin, which was in the common dining area of our dorm. And then he just was too lazy to ever take the coffin back after the scavenger hunt. And so it just, for the rest of the year, there was just a coffin in there. And that just seemed kind of on brand for how things were going.
Yeah. So that's another stereotype about Chicago is wicked smart kids love to learn, but a little bit of a nerdy geek factor. You think, is that true or not true? Do you feel?
When I went there, it was definitely true. And I have to say, I didn't know that when I went there. And so I wasn't that way. I was from a, sort of a more rural place in Missouri. And I got there and I was just like, what the heck is happening? I remember calling my mom, nobody here showers. They're wearing black all the time. But, I got used to it really quickly. But I went to visit the University of Chicago in 2018 with my nephew, Patrick, who was considering it. And I have to say that the students looked really well adjusted. They were clean. They weren't all wearing black. They looked well fed. Their color was good. So it was a definite change. So
if they made it through your psychology standard, because I know you pick up all these little cues and clues, then that's a good sign of some, social, well-adjusted kids.
Yeah, they looked good. They looked good. They looked different than my cohort. So I think that's an improvement.
That's good. And what was your experience with the quarter system? Because I know that they claimed that they founded it on that campus. Is where the whole thing started.
Well, I have only ever gone to schools that have the quarter system.
That's true. You were at Northwestern too. They had the quarter system.
Yeah, I've never been on a semester system. So that's all that I knew. To me, it seemed pretty intense. You would just sort of be getting into the class and all of a sudden it's finals time.
Right.
I know they say you can take more classes with the quarter system, but I don't really know if that's true because a lot of times you still have to take a year's worth of classes. So it's just divided into 3 parts instead of 2.
I think it's usually fair. Like if you look at semester versus quarter, most schools at quarters, they do end up with more classes altogether. Because if you do 4, 4, and 4, that's 12. Or even if you do 3, sometimes that's 11. Most times people, sometimes kids do that many in semester. But I mean, I think that is one of the advantages of quarters. Right. You do get to take more courses. But yeah, everyone will tell you, it's going to hum and it's going to go fast, especially
it goes really fast,
especially at the Chicagos and the Stanfords, and the Carltons and places that have that system that are high academically.
Yeah.
So that's good. So now, do you feel that there's almost an anti-sports mentality, or do you feel that's not true?
I think when I went, it was true. I think they've done a lot to bring sports back, and they have a lot more facilities now. They have fantastic practice spaces for sports, and they also have an amazing gymnasium. So I think that they are really trying to emphasize sports and recruit athletes now, and that is a difference.
How would you say Chicago was different than Northwestern? And I know one for you was undergrad. The one was like a doctoral program. So I know that's going to be a difference there. But you've also lived in Chicago a lot, been on the campuses a lot. They seem quite different to me in a lot of ways. What are your thoughts?
Well, when I visited Northwestern with my daughter, I guess in 2019. Those kids at Northwestern are super high achieving and they're very busy. But and they're really smart, but they aren't deep thinkers in the way that the University of Chicago students are. And I think that's just a function of the training that University of Chicago students get in reading primary text and critical thinking, because you are doing that exclusively your first couple of years. And I think that just frames the way a person learns to think about everything.
Yeah, I mean, you Chicago are deep thinkers. I got to admit, that's one thing they pride themselves on, and I think they do a fantastic job at producing that. Every student I've ever worked with that's gone there. So, are you kind of a fan of the core curriculum in general as a result of that, or not? What are your thoughts on the core? Oh, you know what? We should explain. You should explain core because not everybody might know what we're talking about.
All right. Well, I'll talk about the core and then I'll give you my opinions on it.
Let me shut up and just let you talk. I keep interrupting your presentation with my questions. Okay.
I like questions.
Okay.
All right. So the Common Core is like it's one of the most comprehensive set of general requirements in the country. Maybe Columbia would be somewhat similar to that. But you're going to be taking classes where you're going to be studying literature, social sciences, biological sciences, math, all these different major subjects. There's a language. You have to take a civilization series where you have to learn about a different civilization. So it's really in depth. And these are all usually discussion-based classes. So you're going to have a lot of interaction with professors, and these professors are usually very passionate about what they're teaching, and they're often renowned experts in their field. So it's very interactive, and you really take a deep dive reading primary texts, and you're learning about all these different subjects. And I think that it really gives people a lot of exposure to different styles of thinking, different methods of studying our world and human life. It allows them to kind of integrate that in a way that works for them.
So I have a question for you on it. So was core more like expanded distribution requirements in that, you have to take these courses in these different areas, but there's more of them than schools that have general distribution requirements?
Yes.
Or is it more explicitly prescribed courses that everybody takes this course?
Well, when I went to school at the University of Chicago, it was the latter. Everyone went through the same series. Now they really tried to expand the core, and they're giving students a lot more options to take different kinds of classes and also to take some of their core classes abroad. For instance, the civilization series are often done by students abroad. You go to Europe and you learn about European civilizations. So I think that's great. It adds a lot more flexibility to that.
You're a tough cookie. You went through when it was even tougher than it is now. They've mellowed out.
I have to say, and I was thinking about this today, I'll be honest, I did not enjoy every moment I ever had at the University of Chicago, but it taught me how to read, and it taught me how to think, and it taught me how to write. And I use those skills in my job every single day of my life. And so I am incredibly grateful to my education, because I think with that just lays the foundation for everything.
I mean, that's the case for the liberal arts. You just articulated it, and not teaching you what to think, but how to think. And then you have this transferable set of skills where you know how to think, how to speak, how to research, how to integrate different types of knowledge and apply them to contemporary situations. And that's the case for the liberal arts and sciences right there. Yeah. You're like a walking billboard.
I am a walking billboard. But, and I think in today's day and age, it's never been more important to emphasize the importance of critical thinking, being able to understand what you're reading and being able to go back to the source and even dig through it, even if it's a scientific article or a historical text, to see it for yourself with your own eyes and come to your own conclusions. I think that's really important.
Did you find it to be intimidating at all? Like you're one of the top students in your high school, you go there and you're not necessarily the smartest person in the school anymore. You're like genius kid around you. Was there that element there or not really?
Oh, yes. Yes, absolutely for me. I got there and my high school, it's improved a lot since I went there, but there was no critical thinking in my high school. There were no primary texts. I was really good at memorizing facts and I could spit them out at you. But I didn't necessarily know what they meant, and I couldn't put them all together. And so the first time I went to a class and they wanted me to read a philosopher and give my opinion on him, I just couldn't believe it. I was shocked. And that first quarter for me was rough. I went to the writing tutor a lot. I went to office hours a lot because I needed help. But I have to say, the writing tutor was great. My professors were great. They would sit with me, and help me figure things out. But it was definitely intimidating. And I didn't feel like I was the biggest fish in that pond at all.
I've been impressed with their advising. Seemed like they have lots of different advisors. You have the upper level student, and then you have the, professional guidance advisor, and then the advisor on your major. Do you want to talk at all about their advising?
Yeah, they have a lot of advising. And I think that's a real improvement that they have made, is that, well, you have an academic advisor, and I had one of those. So when I went, I had an academic advisor. But now, in addition to having academic advisor, students also have a career advisor. And they kind of split up your advising into two parts. So your academic advisor helps you with your courses and, picking your major. And apparently they also help you buy your winter coat if you're not from a cold climate. They have expertise in coats. Your career counselor helps you get internships and jobs. And one of the amazing things about the University of Chicago is they have captive internships, and there's 3,000 of them, and they are fully funded. And so they can place their students in internships all over the world. Some of them are at Fermilab. So for people who are interested in science, that's an amazing opportunity. They have an association with a marine biological laboratory in Massachusetts. And they also place people internationally and in underserved communities. So that is an amazing advantage that they have. And one of the great things that the advisors can really help you figure out which internship is best for you.
I was chuckling when you were talking about they have advisors on getting you the right winter coat. They better as cold as that place is sometimes. But that's a practical expertise for Chicago in the winter.
Yeah, I have heard, and I don't agree with this statement, but I have heard that there isn't cold weather. There's only inappropriate clothing.
That's what you call spin.
Yeah. So, but maybe, obviously you need appropriate clothing to be happy there.
So talk to me about strengths in major. I know every time a school like Chicago, we're strong in everything, but I think of them as being obviously exceptionally strong in economics. I know they win all kinds of awards in economics. Mm-hmm. And then I also think of a lot of strength in public policy. Mm-hmm. And I know they produce a lot of people that go work at think tanks and, and just sciences too. But are there any other areas that you think are distinctive strengths?
Sure. Well, obviously, you've hit a couple of heavy hitters with economics and public policy, but environmental and urban studies is a hugely strong program, as well as global studies, area studies. So that is your East Asian, South Asian, Middle East, and Slavic civilization studies is phenomenal. Mathematics and English.
Wow.
They also have an accelerated medical scholars program, so you can begin medical school in your fourth year. And they have similar programs with their other graduate schools that are connected to the university.
Which are great. They can save a year of money there, get an early start.
Yeah, which is, if you're paying $80-some thousand, that's not nothing.
No, not at all. That's after taxes. So talk to me about their admission process. Is there anything that our listeners should know about how they do admissions or anything you want to talk about there?
Absolutely.
You got to talk about those college-specific questions.
I'm going to talk about those college-specific questions. So for admissions, they accept the Common and the Coalition app. They do holistic admissions. They require 2 teacher evaluations. They'll accept additional letters, but they don't like too many. You can send in a video profile. You can send in also anything else you think would portray you in a positive light, like a paper, art portfolio, recital video, things of that nature. They have ED1, ED2, early admission, and regular decision, and they claim not to track demonstrated interest. Their admission rate overall is 6%.
Now, I'm going to push back on that a little bit because I have experience with them.
I agree with you.
There are some schools that they may not do all of the things that a lot of other schools do with demonstrated interest, but they are absolutely looking at who applies ED and EA.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And Chicago has done this thing in the past several times, multiple years now, where they will waitlist a kid and then go to that kid really, really early in the waitlist. I'm talking early April. Mm-hmm. And so it was kind of, that's a backwards way of testing interest, right?
Right.
So I think that, they may not, track every time you've been on the website and every time, you send an email, it may not go into your file, but they are absolutely watching if you apply ED and EA. And my experience, anytime a school has 2 rounds of ED, that's a surefire sign
absolutely
that interest is extremely important to them because that's what ED is, right?
Right.
The ultimate showing of your hand of interest. So I'm just going to push back a little bit on that as admission spin.
I agree with you. And if you look at their early decision admission rates, they take a larger slice of the pie. than they do from regular decision. So, we know that they prefer that. The average GPA of an admitted student is 4.2, and the school was one of the first elite schools to go test optional, but many students still submit scores, and the SAT middle 50% is 1510 to 1560, and the ACT is 34 to 35. They have 2 college-specific essays. One is your basic Why the University of Chicago essay, but the extended essays are very unusual, and they are proposed by students from the accepted classes of previous years. And I'm going to give you some examples just so you can get a flavor of the things that you might be asked about if you are writing essays for your application for the University of Chicago. So here's a question. What can actually be divided by 0? Or, I like this one. Do you feel lucky? Well, do you, punk? Attributed to Eleanor Roosevelt. Misattribute a famous quote and explore the implications of doing so.
This is why you were meant to go there. I heard that. I like this one.
Yeah.
So I recently not recently, it was now about a year and a half ago. What might I call that recently? I had an opportunity to talk to 2 University of Chicago admission officers at the College Board Conference for about an hour, 2 of them. And they both said to me something which I think is great. They both said, our questions are designed in a way so that the person that's meant to attend our school loves them, and the person that's not meant to attend our school doesn't love them.
Right. It's an instant screen out.
Yeah, and that's like a really effective question.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I love the life of the mind and the intellectual stuff, but those questions, they intimidate me.
Yeah, they intimidate me too. I think I wrote mine on what kitchen appliance would you be? And I said I would be a blender. I decided now I think I want to be the instant pot, but that seems a little bit easier than, what can actually be divided by 0.
Yes. Good for them for creativity.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this has been good. Any final remarks at all? You've really covered a lot.
Well, I just wanted to go over some of the financials.
Sure.
The cost of attendance is around $80,000, but they do meet 100% of demonstrated need. They're need blind, and their aid doesn't involve loans. So, and they have really good aid in that they will give free tuition for families under $125,000 with typical assets. And if your family income is under $60,000, then they will cover everything, including tuition, fees, room and board, and expenses. So I think that, if you, are from a lower income family and you love learning, this could be a great fit for you. Sports, they're there. If you really like rah-rah, this isn't the place for you. They do have some Greek life, but it's small. Only 20% of the students participate. So, if you really want to, have a large participation in a sorority or fraternity, this may not be the place for you. But if you love sitting around and arguing about ideas at 2 a.m, this is the place for you. And I think that if you are an intellectually curious person who doesn't mind working hard, you can get a lot out of the University of Chicago education.
And I also think, for people that think, well, it's not pre-professional, because obviously it's a mostly liberal arts and sciences, right? So you don't have a lot of the pre-professional degrees. And anybody that thinks that they're, how do you get a job if you're not on a pre-professional track? I'm impressed with their job placement. The people respect those graduates that have that training. And I think I think the graduates from everything that I've seen, either the students I've worked with that have gone there or just looking at their career placement numbers, they do very well in grad school, professional school, but they also have really good partnerships in the marketplace when it comes to work.
Yeah. Yeah, they have a really wonderful career program. And in fact, you can use it for the rest of your life. So I could go back and have them help me do my resume and, help me do some interview prep if I needed to do that. So it's for the students and for alumni for, as long as you need them. And that's an amazing strength that the school has. I know that for me, I think I've gotten a lot of jobs because I went to the University of Chicago.
Well, you're vetted. Anybody that can make it through that grind and come out, you're tough. So that says a lot. And this has been fantastic. You know, you're coming back for more. I've already told listeners, I've said, Lisa, you got to give me at least one every other month, and I'll take you once a month if you have it in your schedule, because, you know, Elisa's got a lot of experience with the Midwest. So, you know, there's a lot of Midwest schools she knows better than me. And then now that she lives in Chapel Hill, she can easily get to all those research triangle schools and do a visit that's going to be more current than my most recent visit. So I'm telling you right now, we're having you back. So figure
really
out whether the next one is DePaul or Michigan. There's another place you went for 2 years, you know, or Chapel Hill. We'll talk about it off air, but I'm already looking forward to your next one. This is you knew as much as an admission officer. So consider me impressed. Me impressed.
You know, it does help to spend 4 years there. And then I did visit it with my nephew just a couple of years ago. But the University of Chicago is the kind of place that makes an impression on you for sure.
I love the architecture. I'm telling you, when I see the architecture, it just draws me in. Like, there's something powerful about architecture. I felt that way about Wash U too. That Wash U is architecture, just like sucked me in like a magnet and said, this is nice. It is a very pretty campus. It
is beautiful. That's how I ended up there. I think I mentioned to you, I was on a 4-H trip and they took us of a tour of Chicago and they stopped at the University of Chicago, and I got out of the bus, looked around and said, I'm going here for college. You know,
that's that feeling that we go for.
Not knowing anything about the school. But they do have the Gothic architecture. They have a lot of gargoyles, which are supposed to protect students. Maybe you need that. I don't know, depending on how hard that chemistry exam is. But awesome. It's a beautiful place.
Well, thank you so much. And anyone that calls School Match for You and they're interested in Chicago, I'm giving them to you. That's going to be your client.
I will take it.
Awesome. All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. Your College Bound Kid is produced by Dave Vasaya of podcastengineers.com. If you find this podcast helpful, it would help us tremendously if you would subscribe and write us a review on your favorite podcast listening station. And please be sure to click the share button and send this to someone you know that can really use this information. The amazing music that you hear is by Victor Allen Weeks. Our image editor is Tauha Khan. Webmaster is Stalianos Dimitru. And marketing designs are by Kimberly Blass. And if you want to get a copy of the book, 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions, you can go right to 171answers.com. And if you want to have a college coaching session with Mark, you can send him a text to area code 404-664-4340. And if you have a question or a few questions that you would like to ask us, and we'll include them on the show, you can just email us at questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Every week, we'll take one question and include it in the episode. We don't like your questions. We love your questions. So send them our way. And by the way, check out our website, yourcollegeboundkid.com. Again, we thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to meeting with you again next week.